A fugitive Colombian killer who was cut loose in the U.S. after crossing the border illegally, despite being convicted of murder and a slew of other violent charges back home.
Hello everyone. You guys showed amazing support on my last video, so I want to thank you for it. I do understand that the commentary I am providing you with is not the typical one you will find on any of the mainstream media channels, and in my opinion, it is a shame that those who have access to reach millions are not using the proper commentary. If they did, things would be very different today. That is why I need you guys to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It is imperative so that other people like yourself are able to find these videos. Nevertheless, we have some important updates to get to, including a migrant killer that was released into the US by mistake. Yep, by mistake. And everybody gets to keep their jobs like nothing ever happened. Incredible. Let's get started. Okay, so let's get to the first story. And remember, I edited these videos to show you the most important parts, but you will be able to find the links of the full videos in the description below.
You to track some of the biggest top stories that we are following for you. And really a big one is a fugitive Colombian killer who was cut loose in the U.S. after crossing the border illegally, despite being convicted of murder and a slew of other violent charges back home. Immigration authorities have admitted. So this is a big story that we are following.
Well, I'll tell you this. So ICE made a mistake, and today they fell on their sword and they admitted to it. So you got to give them some credit here.
Give them some credit. That's what we are doing now. Give them credit for admitting to making a huge mistake. Yeah. Bravo. Thank you for being honest.
But what it does show is something we've been talking about for years. Despite these assurances about vetting people and background checks by the Biden administration at the border, you know, when you're apprehending and processing 5,000 people a day, there are going to be mistakes.
Obviously, we know there will be mistakes when being overwhelmed. But the thing is, we shouldn't be overwhelmed to begin with. But you see the commentary now? It is the norm. Well, guys, we are overwhelmed, so mistakes will happen, killers will enter the country, and Americans will be at risk. Hey, it's the norm. Just accept it.
Case in point, 49-year-old Efren Vargas. He was wanted in Colombia for murder and theft, and he was sentenced to 17 years in prison in Colombia. However, even with that criminal record, he made his way to southern Arizona, San Luis, and entered illegally in November. Now, the Border Patrol apprehended him. They saw the warrant and transferred him to ICE for deportation. Now, after a few days, ICE mistakenly released him with a notice to appear in court. Last week, agents, however, they found the mistake, and they found him living in Western Massachusetts. Sources say the process, isn't foolproof unless a home country provides the U.S. with a real-time electronic access to their criminal database, or a partner country provides travel data, say Mexico, if he was entered into their system. Sometimes people are showing up at the border and we have no idea who they really are. And there's no biometrics to say, confirm they are who they claim they are. In this case, however, Border Patrol caught it. ICE did catch the error and thankfully picked him up before anything untoward happened to the people of Western Massachusetts. The problem is some agencies just don't have the data that they want and they slip through the cracks.
They slip through the cracks, and it's the norm. It's expected. Americans, this is your life now. This is your reality now. And by the way, what about countries like Venezuela or Syria that we don't get along with?
Again, because you come over the border, you drop your passport or whatever ID you have, you go to the Border Patrol and they go, what's your name? And you give them a name, but your fingerprint isn't on file because you haven't been admitted to the United States previously, right? So we don't have any fingerprint or biometric data on you. So you had a DOB, a date of birth, in some foreign country, and we have no way of checking that out with, say, obviously Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, in many cases, some of these Latin American countries, we don't have the data. Now, Colombia, we are a friendly country with them, and they're one of the more advanced ones. But this guy came from a mountain town in the Andes. They're working on paper, not electronics, so there's a good chance that we don't know what his criminal history is. And the agencies are trying to handle this kind of thing. Luckily, they caught the error. Granted, they didn't. They let him out. They shouldn't have. They didn't want to. They did. And luckily, they found him before, again, any damage was done. But it just goes to show how many people are living in this country who shouldn't be here and who have a criminal past.
What about those gotaways? Imagine those migrant killers or migrants with an extensive criminal record could be in your neighborhood right now and you would never know it. So Americans, do you feel safe? Tell me, do you feel safe right now? What a disgusting and sad reality America is going through today. Let's jump into another perspective where we actually have footage of the exact day this migrant killer crossed into the country illegally.
Why ICE would release somebody that had a warrant or was a suspect or anything in a heinous crime like a murder.
Surging migrant numbers fueling frustration at the southern border, where a convicted murderer was released into the U.S. despite his criminal history. Now, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, telling that man he's free to go and trusting him to come back for a court hearing. And it all seems to be because of an overwhelmed system.
So ICE knowingly had this guy in custody and knew about the murder conviction and still released him. And because of that lack of bed space, that is what they're citing was the reason. Now, we did just hear from ICE. We got a statement from them confirming that they erroneously released this man after he crossed in through the Yuma sector. So here's what we know about this 49-year-old individual from Colombia. According to multiple DHS sources and based on internal documents that News Nation was able to review, Efren Vidales Vargas entered the U.S. illegally through the Yuma sector in the San Luis area back in November of last year. Now, he was apprehended by Border Patrol, and then he was turned over to ICE. Sources say information on the conviction and extensive criminal history was relayed to ICE on December 11th of last year. An ICE officer noted that Vargas had a murder conviction in Colombia. During the interview with ICE, he admitted to criminal acts dating all the way back to early childhood. 2 days later, he was released with a notice to appear due to, quote, national bed space shortage caused by southwest border surge.
Excuse me, guys. I have to laugh, or as I always tell you, my other option is break my screen. But I need my screen, so I am not going to do that. Now, imagine the incompetence here, okay? Just picture it for 1 minute. How stupid do you have to be to use that as an excuse to release a dangerous killer into the streets where anybody will be at risk? How isn't this breaking news all over the place a major red flag for everyone living here? What could possibly go wrong?
Sources say ICE was flagged by a liaison in Colombia of an Interpol notice for Vargas. He was arrested by Boston deportation officers on May 6th in the Pittsfield area. The United States does have decent communications and relations with Colombia. This information was clearly available to officers, as noted in the subject's case, yet he was still released into the country.
The fact that our U.S. government would release somebody into our country, into our community, that was suspected, if not known, but even suspected a homicide is beyond me. And if there's not a greater portrayal to the American people, I don't know what is.
Okay, so they cite a lack of bed space. So what exactly was happening at the southern border when Vargas crossed? Well, the neighboring Tucson sector was bursting at the seams. As you can see, that's my footage from when I was down there at the day that Vargas crossed. Now, there was not enough area for processing in the Tucson sector. So these individuals, a lot of them were bussed over to the Yuma sector. So Yuma also became overwhelmed, which is where Vargas crossed, and they did not have the space to hold this individual. Now, Natasha, when it comes to this individual, he's been in the country for about 6 months since he crossed, and we do not see any kind of convictions or crimes committed stateside. ICE ERO will keep him in custody until those removal proceedings play out.
I'm glad that in this particular case, it seems like nobody was hurt. But this is outrageous. This is flat out treason. It is. And once again, when they are here, they are able to go anywhere in the country. Now, let's go into this other story where some migrants continue to complain about their situation when crossing the border illegally. And we have Univision here pampering to those concerns. I will translate for this one. So the journalist starts the report by saying on the floor and recuperating from a long, cold night. That's how we found a lot of migrants at an encampment near some mountains about 70 miles away from the city of San Diego. And this migrant says, we are suffering because of the cold. It is very cold. The journalist continues, we are seeing a large influx of migrants coming to this area in California. In fact, thousands of migrants came through this same area within the last year. This migrant says, no, immigration hasn't come to pick up anybody. The journalist states, the problem here, according to the migrants, is that Border Patrol agents are taking days to pick them up. This migrant says, this is hard. It is very hard. He says, desperate? Yes, I'm desperate. Then the journalist says, some of these migrants are sleeping in tents that were used by other migrants that were here before them. They also use things like wood and garbage to start campfires to keep warm. He says they are able to eat thanks to some members of the community and humanitarian organizations that provide them with food. And you see the Red Cross flag right there. The good old nonprofit NGOs. I wonder where they are getting all that money from. Very interesting.
Well, you know, one of the big problems right now is the number of NGOs that are involved. These are technically nonprofit religious charities by and large, and they're not tied into the databases that we're talking to. So sometimes people are released, and then these NGOs take them and they fly them to different cities, and that city doesn't know what they really have in their hands.
Let's continue. The journalist is asking these migrants, you're in the middle of nowhere, but you are getting some assistance. And they say, yes, they have come here to help us. And the journalist says, on that day, we saw around 170 migrants, but we know sometimes there could be up to 500 migrants a day. That's what some of these volunteers have told us. Here he says, we never know when Border Patrol agents will come to pick them up. It could be hours or days. That's what the migrants are saying. And most of the time, they are only taking the women with children. The problem is, however, he says, a lot of these individuals are single men that are waiting days and days to be picked up. Can you believe it? This reporter is so delusional that he thinks that is the problem. Anyway, here he's interviewing another migrant and he's asking him, 4 days? Has it been 4 days? And the migrant says, yes, 4 days. The journalist continues. We drove an additional 10 miles and found another encampment with around 70 migrants that were waiting for days and in a worse condition. This female migrant says, "We are pretty much abandoned here." Then the journalist says this Ecuadorian migrant was unable to move his legs. He suffers from diabetes and no longer has medication. These migrants haven't eaten anything, and the volunteers come to this area every now and then. The Ecuadorian migrant here is complaining about the pain he is going through right now. Then the journalist states, "At the time we were talking to the migrants, a border patrol officer came to count the families with children and said that he may come back later for them. But the migrants don't believe him anymore because that's what they were told the previous days." So what do you guys think about this story? It is incredibly sad and scary at the same time, but they will continue to come. They are being encouraged by this administration, which leads me to my final story and update for this episode, and I will translate for you. The journalist starts the report by saying the Biden administration is seeking to implement a new policy that will accelerate the deportation of those seeking asylum. This process usually takes years, but with the new policy, it could take days, and all of this may be decided at the initial credible fear interview. This new policy will include verifying criminal background checks and any connections with terrorism. And this would allow officers to reject and immediately deport any of these individuals. However, the Department of National Security says that this will impact a very small amount of migrants and will not stop them from continuing to seek asylum. Governor Greg Abbott says that this policy does not really stop the illegal immigration problem we have right now. Furthermore, the American government has made a slight change in the credible fear interview protocol, which includes finding out if a migrant is able to relocate to another state of their own country instead of coming here to America. This immigration attorney says what the official is trying to find out is the U.S. really the only place where you would be safe, or could you be safe in your own country, but perhaps in another state? The journalist continues, this new policy seems to be coming during an election year when voters are very concerned about immigration. Then you have former President Trump constantly criticizing Joe Biden for creating this border crisis. Here she says this new policy will not be implemented right away. It has to go through a process of public commentary for around 30 days where there could be many changes. Well, what do you know? The Biden administration is now scared. They know the elections are only a few months away. This is just more gaslighting. It will not change anything. If anything, it shows us how if they really wanted to make a change and really stop the madness, they would, without the need of blackmailing us for voting on stupid bills that would support Ukraine's defense and Israel's war and all of these other wars that Americans want nothing to do with. Now that they are seeing their crappy poll numbers, they're saying, oh yes, we're going to change all of these policies. Don't believe the hype. It will continue to get worse as long as this administration remains in office. And if the next administration proceeds with the same horrendous policies, I will tell you the same thing, regardless if they are Republican or Democrat. So many trillions of dollars wasted that could have been used to help a lot of Americans. But who cares, right? Well, guys, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Special thanks to the patrons of this channel. Your support is incredibly essential. The shoutout section is down below. Don't forget to follow me everywhere, and the link to my Discord server is also in the description below. Please smash the like button and subscribe to this channel as we continue to expose this ridiculous nightmare. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I will see you next time.